Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at Raw Comics. This is, Lord knows which one this is. This is Volume 2, Number 2. I picked this up at a really cool place called McKay's in Tennessee, which was just like a gigantic warehouse of mostly used books and comics and a lot of pop culture stuff. Kind of like a Second and Charles place, and they had this, so I was really happy to grab it. The original Raw stuff was coming out, this is 1990 that this came out, so I hadn't even really got into comics yet at the point this made its impact. I would love to have a full collection of Raw just to go back and really understand what it was, but this is the only actual issue I've got. It has something here on the inside. I think it's probably just a price point or something, I'm not sure. But anyways, it's really nice to actually have a piece of history like this, such a legendary book, and I was really excited to see what was in it and kind of what standards it was setting. So anyways, really happy to have this. Gonna try and be fairly brief about it, but it's an important book. I also think this is probably towards the end of its run, I'm assuming, because it's out from Penguin Random House, and that seems like not so underground. It seems at this point this was pretty culturally important, and maybe Volume 2 was brought back by Penguin Random House, but it didn't kind of match the couture, like hand put together little version of the book that I had in mind, based just kind of on the stories you hear about it. So that's interesting to me. I think at this point Spiegelman had become big enough of an institution, and this was seen as some kind of like, I totally be wrong, but my impression of the package is that this kind of had the status of like the best American comics or something. This was seen as like the place to go to find out who the best underground cartoonists are, and they say something to that effect on the back. So I'll kind of treat it that way. It's hard, also to see something from 2023 and then see it from 1990 and see the relevance of it, but I'll doing my best. Here we have a Linda Barry story. This is pretty much just a little autobiographical piece. But it's fun to see her work in black and white. The only stuff I'm familiar with is the more like kind of scrapbook collage style aesthetic that's in a lot of her work. So that was really cool. Some Jacques Tardy. One of the things I appreciate about this that must have been really compelling in 1990 and whenever the first issues came out, is that this seems to include creators from across the globe. And so just having that kind of exposure, is still something that's so valuable. Like, I always appreciate when Fantagraphics translates some foreign stuff. I love what Glacier Bay is doing, because my thirst for comics extends to the whole world. I want to see it all, and so much of it is cut off behind a language or just an accessibility barrier. And so to have projects like this is just really, really cool. It's obvious that the art that Jack Tardy's art, all the art in here is great. It's a really great piece. There's a lot of very uncomfortable moments in it, which I think is pretty cool. Like here, they have this character that's so ugly that he basically couldn't get with anyone. And here you have a character pulling up, and this girl like willingly showing her ass to kind of make fun of these ugly characters. So there's a lot of really good, like, rich emotional stuff in these works. They are very literate. Like you see here that's happening as he's on his way to get his head cut off. So there's like some really intense short story moments in a lot of these that I really appreciate. And I think the Tardy piece is very good for that. This piece here I find interesting just for its kind of different attempt to integrate images and words together, taking on a more like magazine layout integration of pictures and words. This is pictures by Sue Coe and text by Andrew Tyler. This little piggy went to market. And it's really easy to see this just as book design, but they've put it and couched it in a thing where like it is kind of a combination of words and pictures in the way that comics might be. So it's pretty interesting to me to reconsider these types of presentations and the possibilities of these type of presentations, maybe especially digitally where there could be videos and things like that. I've always been interested in page layout as it relates to comics, and I think this side of the spectrum of the mix has been explored less. Probably Ryan Hughes is the best person I can think of. Here's their actually I know one of the things that Spiegelman's very interested in is the canon. So here you have him kind of making some of those choices for history, I think, by putting a Winsor McCay piece in. So he's not just going multicultural, he's going across time. It doesn't just have to be recent cartooning. He's just trying to create a collection of the best cartoons, and that may be contemporary stuff, it may be stuff from across the world, it may be something from the past, and I like that. There's a piece here by Jerry Moriarty. I had reviewed a Jerry Moriarty book earlier in the kind of course of this channel. I was very unhappy with his book Visual Crime. This at least shows me that that book is grounded in what he is historically known to do, so people who know his work maybe would have expected that more. And again, this kind of book slash comic book layout thing with this text at the bottom I found kind of interesting. There's some design possibilities there, but again, just his genre that he writes in or something didn't really speak to me. We have some Drew Friedman back in the Stipple days, which is really, really fun to see. I've always enjoyed his Stipple work the most. And then a Kim Deitch piece, someone whose cartooning I've always enjoyed, but the fascination with like the carnivals and stuff is not so interesting to me, but always enjoyed the art. Really enjoy this sequence here where in the middle of the black and white they sprung for some color, and there's this color pages here. You have Just Svarte doing a piece here, again some international stuff. I've seen this artist in a number of places. Very kind of Tintin reminiscent to me. The stories are always good. But this is basically, I think I like this panel the most, where you kind of got all these sub panels of them going up. But you know, this kind of, I don't know, this kind of cartooning does it for me sometimes and doesn't other times. I go in and out of appreciating the clean line stuff. This is David Sandlin. Really cool, really kind of just trippy all over the place art. This is the type of stuff that I would have had a hard time with when I was younger, but I quite enjoy now because I can get lost in like the psychedelic nature of it all. So I really enjoyed that piece, and like the document, this kind of three-dimensionally unfolding document within the side of the comic. There's a lot of cool stuff going on here. And then of course there's got to be a Dick Nose with the nutsack. You know, you can't have underground comics with a little bit of that. Some Chris Ware Potato Guy stuff. I've read all that. I have that collection of that book. Kamagurka and Seal. I'm not familiar with that, but it looks like old cartoons to me. Cowboy Hank, this kind of retro stuff. So that kind of thing's not really for me. Yoshihiro Suge, which was really interesting to see. I'm assuming this was probably one of the first things that an international Western audience was ever exposed to of Suge stuff, and I could definitely understand why especially American audiences being introduced to this would have seen kind of the literate depth of this type of writing and the kind of dramatic down-to-earth depth of these kind of thing, and setting the potential for that type of comic in America. I've felt that way a lot as I've gone back, and Sean's been exposing me to a lot of the Gekiga and Garo artists and stuff like that. Just that they were kind of ahead of their time relative to the stunted American industry that kind of got held back by the comics code. And to see examples of that must have been absolutely shocking. And I can see why this influenced so many artists, and why so many artists were probably sitting around from like 1990 until very recently when they started doing the Suge books, being like, God, I want to read more of his stuff, and not being able to get good translations. I could see why it was like such a big deal that people like Suge and Mizuki, artists like that, are getting their due now in America. It's really nice. So I could see, you know, the legacy that this book is leaving, just in terms of who it's introducing us to, whether it be new artists like Chris Ware that are just kind of coming up, or old classics from somewhere else we should know. Here's a piece by Justin Green, rest in peace. This is structurally very, very interesting, formal structure. So it's two divergent stories where you have two characters have an interaction here. You basically have like a bum begging for some money, and the guy that just blows him off, and then he's talking shit at him, and then they go their separate ways, and you come around, and eventually the bum he's able to perform CPR and save the rich guy's life. And so there's like this kind of little morality tale in there. Reminds me a lot of the very intense scene from the movie Crash, where the cop who has assaulted someone earlier in the movie is then the person who has to save him from a car wreck. Just that kind of gut punch emotional intensity of a moment like that. The only thing is, like, in Crash, when they're doing it, it doesn't feel like there's a moral lesson. Like, that movie's very much about the ambiguity of morals, whereas this has like this strong kind of almost obnoxious moral superiority to it, which is strange because Justin Green is in turn like responding to the perceived superiority of the guy that blows him off too, and like bucking back at that and be like, oh, you think you're so superior? Like, I'm the good one. Look at me, I'm the one who saved your life. And there's kind of that, and there's this guy doesn't even say anything to him. He just says, hey, mister, I'm broke and I'm late, got a quarter. And he just kind of says, ugh. And he's, whoa, Mr. Big Shot hasn't got the guts to look me in the eye and say no. I ain't made of stone, And then the guy says, drop dead. So really, when you're looking at this story, even though Justin Green presents himself or the character, whoever it is, I'm assuming he's kind of the characters representing his worldview, he's trying to make himself look morally superior. And then this guy here says, how can I ever pay you? I'll settle for $25. So he's remembered it and he's held this grudge, and $25 is worth your life kind of thing. But I find it pretty annoying, like, that this character is in some morally inferior place to this other guy who saved his life, and that he's like the slag asshole guy. I've been in this situation on the other side of it. I lived in Berkeley. I lived very near campus, and I walked to campus for a class. I'd come home for lunch and walk back. So I'd walk like Telegraph Avenue 2 or 3 times on a given day, back and forth. So I was walking 4 to 6 times, and there's certain homeless people in Berkeley that have their spot, and so you walk past them every time, and they don't remember they have a mental disability, or they're on drugs, or they just see so many people. So every time you walk by them, they're like, spare some change. And this one lady, spare some change. And like, you just have to learn to write them off. I did the calculation once of like, if I gave 5 cents to this one, like every person I saw, first off, that's the problem. There's a whole street full of people asking for money. How do you choose who you give money to? And then if I did give, say, a minimal amount of money, like 5 cents to each person, and then they've asked every time I walk by because they don't remember me, so 5 cents every time to every person on the street, 4 to 6 times a day, you're looking at thousands of dollars a month, which at that time I definitely didn't have. So, this kind of moral superiority about this asshole that's not just giving him a quarter, that has all this money, like, it's a pretty infantile view of the world, I think. And then so to attach it to like this moral superiority lesson, it's a really well done comic, like structurally fascinating how it shows these divergent stories and how they come back together and all of that. But just the worldview represented is a turnoff to me. It's just young, stupid stuff, that doesn't see a bigger picture. It's very, very self-concerned, while it's also accusing someone else of being self-absorbed and concerned. Because really, that's what he. Like, this guy doesn't even say anything rude to him. He just kind of ignores him and blows him off until he's an asshole, and then he tells him to drop dead. So there, a story that's shitting on self-absorption while being self-absorbed, those things kind of always irritate me. Here's a Mark Beyer story. Formerly, I just really like the look of this. It's kind of about a cult. I really enjoy the design of this page, looking like wallpaper with these characters repeated. So there's a pattern to it and kind of their standard state, and then there's the more emotional state having the conversation. And then I just really like this. This actually seems like key to a lot of the art I'm seeing now. Must be coming out of this kind of Mark Beyer vein of cartooning. I just feel like I'm seeing a lot more of this type of imagery lately, which is cool. I enjoy it. Then you have probably the most confusing piece in here for me, which is this Babe, Darling of the Hills, which is a reprint. I looked it up just to make sure it's not a fake thing. This was actually printed in October of 1949 and is by an artist named Booty Rogers. And in the back of this story, I'm going to dig into this one pretty deep because it fascinated me. Booty Rogers, born 1904, is the oldest living contributor to the first comic book, The Funnies. During his career, he assisted Jack Mosley, or Zach Mosley and Smilin' Jack, and created Sparky Watts. He retired from comics in 1952 and opened 2 art supply shops in Arizona. I mean, Lord knows it's 1990, but he was apparently doing a self-published autobiography. So this was actually something that was made and published. Well, I shouldn't say made, but it was published in 1949. It wasn't something that was made in 1990 by this old guy, going back and having more freedom now. This was something that was published. And because Spiegelman seems to be on this canon project where he kind of wants to enter things onto the record, it seems very intentional that he's choosing this piece and trying to put it on the record. So that sets the stage for me being very fucking confused about what I was reading and why Spiegelman chose to put this on the record, but I kind of think I sorted it out. So this is The Mysterious Case of Mystery Mountain, and you have this grandpa character, and he comes running back, and he's like, oh my god, did you hear the awful news? This girl disappeared. She went up to the Mystery Mountain. And then they have this big conversation about like how thousands of girls, oh wow, they're like putting it together for the first time. Man, we've been losing a lot of girls, like 2,000 last month. So obviously this has been a problem in their community. And Babe, darling of the hills, is going to go now try and, even though she knows it's dangerous for attractive young women to go to the mountain, she's going to go like, I'll solve it, and she's going to be plucky and go off and solve the problem of Mystery Mountain. All good up to this point. A little funny that the people in this town are so stupid. She sneaks up on the mountain with this doorway that's obviously beckoning, and as soon as people get close, they hear like this tweet, and that tweet like hypnotizes them. So you have these 2 rambunctious male characters with no shirt on, like whistling, hypnotizing this girl to get her to come up, and they basically, behind this big door, trap her up on the mountain, and then they're centaurs, so now she's trapped in centaur land, and they immediately like basically just capture her, put a bridle on her, and then sell her at an auction. And like, even just flipping through, you can see the strange rapey BDSM stuff that just saturates this story, like putting her in the harness there and riding on her back and all of these things, this capturing the sexy girl, selling her at the market. Some of the language that's used in here, let me see if I can find, I probably put a tab on it, but there's at some point, this story is ostensibly a morality tale that's trying to make us reconsider how we treat horses by putting people as the horses for the horses to ride. But there's so much of this underlying kind of rapey sadism to it. And I think that's probably what Spiegelman found so compelling about this, is that it's so subversive. I think that probably appealed to him, but why he would be wanting to put on record something that was like ostensibly a morality tale about treating animals nice, but reveled in sadistic abuse of women, I don't know why that's the one he chose. It's a very odd combination, and I just find it really hard to believe that this artist had no idea that he was making something sexually suggestive, like within her dialect. And again, this was published in 1949, so I don't know what the word cum, C-U-M, in common vernacular had become part of the common vernacular at that point, I'm assuming. But she says, but how come I come up here when I didn't want to come up here? And it's kind of just saturating, and like, and then this is the only words, come, want, come. Those are the only ones that are like put in bold. So it's hard not to see that as like intentional sexual subversiveness. And you read stuff like this and you're like, well, no wonder fucking Wortham thought all of this stuff was terrible for kids, you know? Like, you don't have to go very far, and you don't have to be too much of a pervert to see perversion in this. I can definitely see the artist Booty selling it as like, well, I was just making this morality tale about, you know, how we treat animals, and you're a pervert. But I think that's a pretty hard argument. Like, artists are pretty, to be this good of an artist, you have to be pretty clever and intentional. So anyways, you have being ridden around. You have this very strange girl with the long nose that I feel like I've seen in Dan Clowes and in other places that seems to have like a sexual connotation to it. But it looks even more so with the bit in and all of that stuff. Then you have this where they're going around and she's having to be like used on this obstacle course where women are jumping over and getting impaled, they're drowning in quicksand, they're running across hot coals. So all these abusive things that again are supposed to make us, think how we abuse horses. Him like fish hooking her mouth, just all these things that really double function as this morality tale, and then just this kind of doused in the perversion. And then she comes back after all this abuse, and it's like, what were you doing? Oh, nothing much, just horsing around. So I found that one very strange. I get why, like, the double meaning was kind of formally appealing to Spiegelman, maybe, but I think this is a pretty sketch one to put on the record. It's super well reproduced, so I don't know what kind of assets they had for this, but this is like, if I was going to see comics reproduced, this is what I want them to look like for the most part. It's very, very crispy and well reproduced. So a very interesting piece in the middle of this. Here's an artist named Altan. Really, really enjoy the style on this. A really interesting story too about a guy who goes to a prostitute and is kind of telling her about his life, and then you realize at the end that she's his mother and he's come back to kill her. But really love the stylization on this. Can see a lot of different influences from this artist as well. Someone I've never heard of before, and someone I'm going to have to chase down because I really enjoy it. Then you have basically getting real near the end of Mouse here, so that's cool. I didn't read this because I read Mouse, but I like that they another thing that's really interesting about this piece here is it feels like they did a paper switch to get thinner paper that feels more like newsprint. So that's cool. That kind of lends to the couture put together, like hand put together kind of thing that I associated with Raw. I expected more of that. And then it looks like, I'm not sure if this is gray ink or if they switched paper again. It's a little hard to tell because it's a fibrous paper, but I think it's gray paper. It's harder to see the dots on fibrous paper, but this doesn't look like a printed gray. I actually really like Mouse with this coloration behind it. The copies I have are white, and I would love to have like a hardbound copy of Mouse that had this on it. Something about the gloominess of the toned paper really adds to it for me versus the starkness of the white. Adds a bleakness to it that really works. I don't know if all the stuff that was published in Raw had this. Like, did every version of Mouse in Raw have this, or was just this a one-off? So people who are better historians than I am, I'd really like to know, but I would love to see Mouse reprinted that way. Then a piece on Henry Darger, which is really cool. I think everyone knows Henry Darger, the Outsider artist, but really nice that there's these big fold-outs. So again, to that kind of more custom-made book thing that I was expecting from Raw, having these fold-outs here, and even some bits of his story. I've never read that before. It's tempting to read it, but with like the handwritten nature, this kind of looks faked anyways. I don't think it's actual scans of the actual documents. So tempting to read that, but also I started to, and with the handwriting, it's just kind of nonsense, so I didn't really dig into it. Yeah, I'm assuming this is Yair Pulga. This is just another cool black and white piece. It was really nice hatching throughout. Another artist I'll have to look up. And our Sikoryak doing, I've seen this one before, good old Gregor Brown, the Kafka's Metamorphosis done through Charlie Brown and Peanuts. So that's a fun one. And then a really, really great one-page piece that turns into a not so great 3-page piece by Ben Catchor. Ben Catchor is someone I've heard over and over again how much people love him, and I've tried again, and I've just never landed with me. This first page lands with me. This is so clever. He has, again, 2 diverging stories, so kind of like the Justin Green piece. You have a guy trying to sell collapsible tables and failing and winding up at a bar, and then you have the people running the bar. And to have this character in the middle and have this folded table, which can fold with the page, kind of like Richard McGuire's Here book that folds on the hinge like the corner of the room. And then you also have the corner fold the other way. You have it go back in perspective the other way. So for both of those to be going right through gutter there is really, really cool. And then the divergent meeting up. You read this guy's story and it's done. And even this is like they each have their own title, right? There really are two different stories. And then they just meet in this last panel and they refer to him like, oh, he's a regular. So that's all really smart. Should have left it there. Because then we went to another one. Printing kind of fucked this one up. But here you have the table flat. So you don't have that hinge anymore. It unfortunately didn't print on the hinge of the page. And then you have the perspective trick again here. So cool, following the same thing, but now the trick's played out. And really you don't get the folding anymore. Now you have the table in the middle. And then you have where there's no hinge on this page with these things in the middle. And so you've now lost the kind of cool folding effect. And this piece here to me wasn't as resonant. I mean, maybe there's some formal thing I'm missing, but I really felt like this was a great, like, one story broken into two stories and leave it at that. To have two stories that continued, I think overdid it. So I don't know. I finally found a Ben Catchor thing that I really, really like, and then it kind of fell apart. Like, I don't know, his work just doesn't land for me. So if people could tell me, like, what is it that people really, really like about his stuff the most, I'd be very curious to know, because maybe I'm just not seeing it. Just need to shift my lens. And then this piece by the artist Marty, really like the art on this, really like the rendering style. Yeah, super cool looking art. Again, someone that I could see influencing. A piece by Richard Maguire, who, as we all know, is just absolute fucking genius of comics. And then a piece by Charles Burns as well on the inside back cover here. This piece, though, is so cool because Maguire he's just so smart with the medium and does things no one else is doing. To be able to freeze a moment and tell this much information about that one moment is something that's so cool. It's something that I've always wished I were good enough to do. I've had similar images to this in my mind before, and I've never known how to do it, like similar thoughts. So to see someone do it is really cool. But I take this from James Joyce, and I think he's kind of doing that. This James Joyce, in the portrait of the artist as a young man, has the idea of the epiphany as being the realization that all reality exists all at once through chain of association, and that you could focus on one thing and then just chain associate from that. And this has that aspect to it where you can look at what each character's thinking about and their chain of associations, and then you can start chain associating other ways within that. And within this one frozen moment, if you could layer these and stuff, you could basically extrapolate all of reality through these chain of associations. And for all of that, plus all the little emotional things about each person's life and how these characters are acting, how these people might interact with each other if they're on the street together, how they're seeing these things differently, kind of the resonances between this guy here remembering someone talking and this guy here thinking about the hot dog screaming. It's just so much packed into one image. It's genius. It's genius work. Richard Maguire's obviously a genius level artist, a genius level writer. So that's a really cool thing. I've never seen that before. Some of these I've seen here and there in other places, but not that. And then some Charles Burns, which is always really, really cool. Love me some Charles Burns. And really nice to see him with some coloring. And cool to see him also with, the dots visible in the coloring. I feel like that suits his old school style pretty well, but uses the colors in a more unsettling way. And again, this is like, if I saw old comics reprinted, this is what my ideal would be, is perfect black and white. None of the weird, well, I think this does have some color trapping, but I would get rid of the color trapping. It doesn't really have it anywhere else. Really nice colors, but not super saturated. And then, if you prefer the dots or not, I don't really normally, but here I like them. But this is pretty close to what I think reprints of old comics should look like, as is the really weird BDSM horse piece earlier in the book by Booty. So those are both pretty good examples of like the kind of reprints that I would put a lot of money into buying of certain old comics. So really cool, really glad I grabbed this. And like I said, Raw is just such an important part of comics history. I'll hopefully be able to find myself more copies here and there in bins and used stores and things like that over time. I'm sure it's probably pretty expensive to get a hold of a complete set, but really cool. Definitely would like to have more of these. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and you want to support us, there's two ways to do that. The first way to do that is through our Patreon. On Patreon, we have two different tiers of engagement. At the lower tier, you just get early access to our videos. At the second tier, you get exclusive access to previews of the projects Sean and I are working on, our personal work, as well as the ability to participate in our ongoing webcomic experiment, Pranede, where you can vote to help determine what happens in the next iteration of the story. Any of the money that we make from Patreon just goes back into helping us buy the books that we review, so we try and put that back into other creators, publishers' pockets. We really appreciate your help doing that, help keeping you in things to check out, reviews to look at. But if you want to support Living the Line itself, the best thing to do is to support Living the Line Publishing and what Sean's doing with that side of things. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of Sean's projects now. Plaza by Yokoyama Yuichi. This is translated by Ryan Holmberg and is very large for a manga, so that's a really cool feature of this book, this standard manga size. And this is just a 200 some odd page representation of what Yokoyama Yuichi thinks of the Carnival Parade, and he's just made this like relentlessly loud and rhythmic book that pushes all kinds of amazing boundaries of what comics and manga are, and we could not recommend this book more.
Like and subscribe and hit the bell, please, so Carson can finish reading his books and let me go home.